So the standard story about seeking is that it is a proactive engagement with uncertainty. So proactive in the sense that um, it- something like fear or rage, it's like here and now, I've got to get rid of the uncertainty of how do I escape this danger or how do I get rid of this bastard that's in my way, you know. But seeking is engaging with future uncertainties. It's
Yeah,
it's
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 almost like the other way around. Like we are looking for uncertainty to
you're looking for
eliminate more.
uncertainty, and that's where the paradox arises. It's like in all of the other ones, you're trying to get rid of uncertainty. With seeking, you positively drawn to uncertainty. That's what we mean by it's interesting. You know, it's interesting because I don't understand it. I don't know it. It's new. You know, it's a positive engagement with uncertainty. But the answer to the apparent paradox is that by engaging with uncertainty now, you're reducing uncertainty in the future.
Uh-huh.
So seeking is a luxury, you know, because I don't
Mm.
have to deal with present uncertainties. I can deal with future uncertainties. Just so the more you know about the world in which you have to meet your needs, the more you're going to be able to meet your needs in that world, and the less that world is going to bite you in the
Mm.
backside. You know, it's because you know how it works, you
Mm.
understand. So seeking does have a rather prosaic um, biological explanation. That's why we're interested in what's unknown. That's why but you're speaking about more than that. And so now I want to go to that level.
Hi everyone, my name is Balázs Kegel and this is the I Scientist podcast where we explore artificial intelligence, the body and the soul. And this time it's my great pleasure to introduce you Mark Solms in the series of my scientific heroes. So Mark is a neuropsychoanalyst actually. So officially you're a professor of neuropsychology, but you call yourself a neuropsychoanalyst, which is itself a very interesting combination. I love it. So you are in South Africa in the University of Cape Town, and you are the author of The Hidden Spring, A Journey to the Source of Consciousness, a book that changed a lot of things that I thought about consciousness and life. And actually, I re-listened to it recently just to prepare for this interview, and I realized how much I actually integrated from this book into my thinking about artificial intelligence, consciousness, and the kind of things we do in as engineers. So try to sort of engineer these systems, which is also one of your topic, and at the end I will ask you about this because I'm super curious. So, Mark, how are you today?
I'm well, thanks. Very glad to be here. And I'm glad to hear that you found my book so useful.
No, very much, very much. You know, with perhaps with Mike Levin, is you are the two people who formed this sort of view of consciousness the most in me. I want to talk about a lot of things, and the what I was thinking about the arc would be that first we talk about sort of like unitary conscious agents, how feelings and the the free energy principle and prediction error, how they come together in this theory of consciousness. Some particular feelings, which I'm like really interested in this categorization, that's more like the psychoanalytical view. And then we go into sort of the hierarchy of agents or the hierarchical organisms that Mike Levin is also talking a lot about, because there it's becoming really complicated, but also very interesting how these things come together. So let's start with let's say the foundation of your theory, which is that consciousness is more to do with lower level functioning, lower in the terms of brain, more about feelings than about higher level cortical processing, and it's a lot to do with prediction error, and the free energy principle. So how do these things come together in your theory?
So I'll start with the anatomical point, lower in the brain. I will then move to feelings, and I'll explain how those two things are connected. And then when it comes to the free energy principle, I will point out the connection between that principle and homeostasis, which has everything to do with feelings and to do with what's going on in the lower parts of the brain that are crucial for consciousness. So let's start with the fact um, that in 1949 already, Maruzzi and Magoon demonstrated that, to their great surprise, I mean, they were interested in what would happen if you deprive an animal of any sensory input. The animal in question was a cat, or were cats, and in line with how everybody understands consciousness, then and now, they thought that consciousness has to do with perceptual information coming in and being processed by the cortex. And yet, when you deprive cats of such input, or indeed deprive them of their cortex altogether, if you do it early enough in life, they don't lose consciousness, as Maruzzi and Magoon expected they would. They just become very agitated cats. And conversely, what they discovered, again, I must emphasize completely by surprise, was that if you damage small areas of the brainstem, the upper brainstem, in a region that, since they discovered it, has come to be known as the reticular activating system, if you damage that part of the brain, which does not generate perceptual imagery and which, in fact, is for the most part processing endogenous information, so it's coming from within the organism, if you damage that part of the brain, the cat goes into a coma. And most interestingly, if you disconnect it from the cortex is no longer conscious. It's no longer producing conscious perceptual imagery. So what that showed, not to put too fine a point on it, is that cortex is not intrinsically conscious. The cortex only becomes conscious to the extent that it is activated by the reticular activating system. So that should have settled the matter. Consciousness comes from deep within the primitive brainstem. It does not flow in with sensory information from the outside world. But Maruzzi and Magoon were so surprised by what they found that they interpreted it in a way that enabled them to save the old view. Their interpretation was that the brainstem is a sort of a power source for the cortex, in the sense that a television set, in order to do its thing, it needs to be plugged in at the wall. If you unplug it, then of course it's not going to show you television programs. But that doesn't mean that really the television programs come from the power source in the wall. That's their argument. And that argument has remained with us ever since. In other words, to use their words, and to use the words that are used by most people still today in neuroscience, the reticular activating arousal is prerequisite for the cortex to produce phenomenal consciousness. But that's only prerequisite in the sense that an electricity supply is prerequisite for the television set to do its televisual thing. The actual programming, the actual receiving of the signal, the actual production of the visual and auditory qualia of television is produced by the television set, not by the power source. The power source is just a necessary precondition. And so they differentiated phenomenal consciousness, the contents of consciousness, the qualities of consciousness, which they insisted still are cortical, from what they called the level, a sort of a quantitative dimension, which doesn't contain qualia. It doesn't have phenomenal content. So that's the standard view. Now, so you said I place consciousness lower in the brain. I've already told you what the basic observation for that leads us to that. And it's not only cats, the same applies to any vertebrate. If you damage the homologous structures in any vertebrate, the animal goes into coma. Consciousness is wiped out, including in human beings. In fact, the smallest area of damage in the human reticular activating system that reliably produces coma is in the parabrachial complex, 2 cubic millimeters. That's all you need to do, is lose 2 cubic millimeters of parabrachial tissue and you're in a coma. But crucially, they say there's no content, no quality to this blank wakefulness that the brainstem's supposed to generate. So now that leads me to the second part of my answer to your question, which has to do with feelings. I think that this is not blank. This level of consciousness does have a quality, and that quality is affective feeling, raw feeling. And why do I say that? I say it because all the evidence points to that conclusion. I told you, if you decorticate a neonatal cat or rat or any mammal, if you remove its cortex after birth, it's not in a coma, and it's also not in a state of blank wakefulness. Blank wakefulness is what we used to call the vegetative state, which we now more politely call non-responsive wakefulness. In other words, the animal should be non-responsive, but it's not. I told you, those cats were very agitated. My dear late colleague, Jaak Panksepp, used to, in fact, each year when he got a new group of graduate students, he would show them 2 cages in which one of them had rats that were decorticate, and the other one had rats that had little bandages on their head that looked the same as if they had had the operation, but they hadn't. And he asked the students, which of these has no cortex? And they would reliably point to the ones that did have cortex and say, these are the ones that don't have cortex. And he would say, why do you say that? And the students would reliably say, because these other ones, these ones on this side are more lively. In other words, the ones with no cortex, in fact, are the ones that are more lively. They are more responsive. They are responsive to emotional stimuli, and they respond appropriately to emotional stimuli. In other words, if you frighten them, they show fear responses. If you impede them, they show rage responses. If you put them with their little puppies, they start to nurture them. If you put them in a group, they start playing with each other. If you put them with the opposite sex, they start copulating with each other, etc. These rats with no cortex show all of the basic emotional responses to their environment. Now, the same thing applies to human beings. Of course, nobody has ever decorticated a human being, but there are children who are born with no cortex. It's called hydranencephaly. And these kids, likewise, they are conscious, they're awake, but not only are they awake, their wakefulness is not blank. They are emotionally responsive. If you tickle them, they giggle. If you clap your hands, they startle. If you put a little baby on the lap, they go, ooh. If you take the baby away, they go, and they get cross, etc. So there's a content there. There's a quality there. That quality is not perceptual. They can't possibly have conscious perception because they have no cortex. So the cortex is where perceptual information is processed, and rendered conscious if it is activated by the brainstem. But what this evidence suggests is that we feel our way into our perceptions, and this is why we become conscious of them. The cortex otherwise processes information unconsciously if it's not modulated by the upper brainstem, which, as I said, these kids and cats and rats suggest that the brainstem by itself can generate a quality and a content of consciousness called affect, feeling. Now, many people are skeptical. Well, I shouldn't say many people. Many neuroscientists who should know better are very skeptical. They say, how do you know that it is anything it's like to be this child? You know, maybe they're just zombies. They look as if they're having emotions, but they don't really have emotions. Maybe these are just, automatized responses.
Reflexes, yeah.
And, they say that without ever having interacted with these children. You have to interact with these kids to see what I'm talking about. But, it's true, they don't have cortex, so they can't speak, so they can't tell us what it feels like to be them. And so my colleagues adopt this radically skeptical position. So we need to use other methods to get around that problem. We don't only have lesion data. How about if you stimulate electrically the deep nuclei that I'm speaking of in the upper brain stem? On my view, if you stimulate those nuclei, you will produce raw feelings. On the standard Marutzi-Magoon view, you might increase the level of arousal or decrease the level of arousal, but that won't have any content or quality. And so there's a falsifiable prediction. One view or the other view will be confirmed experimentally. And I can tell you which view is confirmed. It's my
Yes.
view. When you stimulate these upper brainstem structures, as we have occasion to do clinically every now and then, we have to insert electrodes, for example, for the treatment of Parkinson's disease, also for the treatment of pain, which interestingly we treat by stimulating the upper brainstem in the periaqueductal gray. This is a well-known site for treating pain, which is a feeling, which is a conscious quality, which is very unpleasant, and we treat it by stimulating the periaqueductal gray. If you stimulate the substantia nigra, which happens sometimes accidentally while you're trying to treat the Parkinson, you're trying to stimulate this thing called the subthalamic nucleus. If you go a little bit too far, you stimulate the substantia nigra. And in one famous case, which I'll just cite as an example, the patient fell into a suicidal depression within 5 seconds. Stop the stimulation, within 30 seconds, the suicidal depression disappears. She'd never had any depression before. She had no psychiatric history. So you get the widest range and the most intense affect is produced by stimulating upper brainstem. So that's another method, gets around the problem of if you can't report on what you're feeling. What about taking people who are in intense states of emotional distress or joy, as Damasio did, with positron emission tomography? You scan them. If the cortex is where the qualities of emotion that we're talking about is being generated, you'll expect the activation to be there. If it's in the upper brain stem, you'll expect the activation seen on positron emission tomography to be in the upper brain stem. Guess where it is? It's in the upper brain stem. And one last thing, the drugs that most psychopharmacologists give to their patients for the treatment of emotional disorders, they manipulate neuromodulators that are sourced in the reticular activating system, like serotonin, which is used in the treatment of depression, like dopamine that's used in the treatment of psychosis, like noradrenaline that's used in the treatment of anxiety. If you increase or decrease these neuromodulators sourced in the reticular activating system, you don't create the higher or lower level of arousal that might interest an anesthetist. What you do is you modulate emotion, the sort of thing that interests psychiatrists, who treat feelings, who treat emotional disorders. So the fact is, Mauritian Magoon's view is just unsustainable. So you add those 2 points together. Number one, that damage to the reticular activating system obliterates consciousness, that it is therefore prerequisite for any form of consciousness. And you add to that the observation that it's not blank wakefulness. It's not a purely quantitative level. It has content and it has quality, namely affective feeling. That suggests that the prerequisite for any form of consciousness is raw feeling. That is the basic, elemental, foundational form of consciousness, upon which all other forms are not only built, but they disappear without that foundation. That's why you get coma. And then I said the third thing about the free energy principle. The free energy principle is a sort of a physical, statistical, mechanical principle, which turns out to govern homeostasis. There's a beautiful paper by Carl Friston, who's the author of the free energy principle. A beautiful paper by him in one of the journals of the Royal Society. He published it in 2013. The paper is called Life as We Know It, where he shows that the basic distinction, and in doing this, he's saying the same thing that Schrödinger did many decades ago, that the basic feature of the distinguishing feature of living versus non-living things is living things oppose entropy. They seek to minimize their entropy, and they distinguish themselves from their environment with there's some sort of membrane or skin or what's called a Markov blanket in the free energy principle, which differentiates the system from the organism from its environment. And then it doesn't just equalize with the environment. It tries to maintain its own viable bounds. You have to stay within a narrow range of many different parameters like temperature and blood pressure and hydration and oxygen and blood sugar and so on. You've got to stay within very narrow bounds. Like I mentioned, temperature. You have to stay, roughly between 36.5 and 37.5 degrees Celsius, a very narrow range. The outside environment, I'm currently in Cape Town where it's winter. I think it's about 12 degrees outside. If I were to equalize with my environment, I would die of hypothermia. So you've got to work at staying within your viable bounds. If you move out of where you need to be, what Friston calls your preferred states, your viable states, your expected states, you expect to be within those ranges. If you move out of that, then you're moving out of homeostasis. And the free energy principle formalizes mechanistically, mathematically, formalizes how we have to have predictions as to what we must do to return ourselves to our viable bounds. This is what our reflexes and our instincts are for, but it's also what all learning is for, because these reflexes are too basic. They only work in very fixed, stereotyped environmental circumstances. The world is full of surprises and novelties, where you're not in the expected circumstances. So you have to learn from experience what to do in these more uncertain environments. And the free energy principle simply describes how this all works in terms of statistical mechanics. So free energy is just average surprise. You have to minimize your uncertainty. You have to maximize the efficiency of your predictions. And so all of this comes down to homeostasis. And that's what this paper of Friston's, when I read it, I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought, well, I know that these upper brainstem structures, which generate consciousness in the raw basic form that I was talking about earlier, in terms of what goes on in the parabrachial complex and the periaqueductal gray and the nucleus solitaris and these sorts of things. These are homeostatic mechanisms. So that led me to the idea, which I then put to Carl Friston. If you're saying that the basic principle governing life, namely homeostasis, can be reduced to this mathematical formalism of the free energy principle, then some extended version of this must be must be how we can understand how feelings work. And feeling is the basic form of consciousness. And so that's what I then did with him in 2018, I think it was.
Yes.
We developed this extended form of his mathematics that he used to explain how homeostasis works, and showed that an extended form of that can account for how feeling works, how feeling arises physically in nature.
So, wow, yeah. What I like about this story is that it's so simple. At the end, like everything falls in place. There is one question I ask from everybody who works with the free energy principle, which is this is a beautiful concept that we also use in AI, sort of like reinforcement learning, and all those models are based on this this view that there is the agent, there is the environment. The environment communicates through sensors, sort of states to the agent, and based on the states, the agent decides to do this or that. It also gets rewards from the environment, which it wants to maximize in the long run. My problem, which may or may not, affect the theory, but you often mention that there is an outside and an inside, but all these systems are dynamical systems that have to be connected to the outside physically because they have to metabolize, they have to eat. There's a lot of things come through the membrane. So when I imagine like a little agent on the membrane, I don't think this separation is so clear there. And it sort of relates what is a self, what is an entity, what is an agent. And this agent, I mean, the best description I can think about is that it's a set of dynamical systems that self-maintain themselves. But the membrane doesn't really exist in a certain sense, and this is especially hard when we go to like higher levels, like swarms or societies where certain elements of the body can go in and out and can change body because they are looser systems than, let's say, like me. But even inside me, if I look at my intestinal flora, is it the inside or is it the outside? Or my fingernails, is it the inside or outside? So this border, when I am on the border, for me it's very tricky. So how should I think about this if I go beyond just this very simple model?
Okay, well, let me say something first of all, which is a minor point, just because of the way that you put it. I want to point out that reinforcement learning is a very different thing from active inference. So I don't want our audience to think that an RL agent functions by the principle I've described. The free energy principle is constitutive of the system. The system maintains its own structural and functional integrity by implementing the free energy principle, and the minimization of free energy is good for the system. It's not good for the universe. It's good only for the system. So it has an intrinsic valence, and it's not a reward function that's been coded into the agent by some computer engineer. It's actually constitutive of the agent. The agent has to minimize its free energy, otherwise it'll cease to exist as a system. And autopoiesis, it's not only homeostasis, autopoiesis is governed by, and that paper I mentioned of Friston's, he does a wonderful experimental demonstration of all of this by creating an artificial self-organizing system with a blanket, with this Markov blanket that you're actually asking me about, and shows, how this is how this, and then he changes the values, the mathematical values, so that it's no longer function. The dynamics of the Markov blanket no longer function in the way that they must, and the system just disintegrates. It literally dissipates and equalizes with its environment. So that's very different from how a reinforcement learning agent works.
No, actually, just on this point, let me just say, yeah, I agree with you. Like the usual way reinforcement learning is solved, it has nothing to do with it. But what I really like to work on is model-based reinforcement learning. When I do have a predictive model of what's going to happen if I act, and I do use this model inside when I decide what to do, either to learn like a reflex, like a fast policy, but I can even think within this model as like a internal simulator of the outside world. And in this sense, it is getting closer to the free energy principle.
Yes, it is closer in this. You're right that an agent working by active inference, which is the formalism whereby we instantiate the free energy principle in an artificial agent. It's fundamental to its functioning is that it has to have a model of itself.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's definitely. And what's interesting, what happens in AI is that those algorithms that do use the model, and which let's say they do have to have a good idea what to model, which is not always easy. But when we give it to them like engineers, those systems can learn much faster than the ones that are completely model free in terms of sample complexity. So it's an interesting argument for saying that kind of models are probably what evolution brought to life, because it's much more sample efficient to learn in this way.
But just to reiterate, the crucial point is that these are the intrinsic needs of the system. It's the endogenous needs of the system. If the system does not minimize its free energy, it expires as a system.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now to come back to your question about the blanket, about the thing that sequesters the system from the environment. The points you make are valid about the permeability of the say, for example, the epithelium, the skin, for example. But what we're talking about here, I mean, although in a structural sense, the same principle applies. The principle is in fact a statistical principle. It's a principle. It's derived from set theory. What is part of the set and what is not part of the set. And Markov, after whom the Markov blanket is named, is speaking about causal dependencies. What can influence what causally in terms of the statistical mechanics. In other words, we're talking about an information exchange between the system and its environment. We're not talking about an exchange of heat or temperature. It's not a thermodynamic. It's derived from thermodynamics. And in fact, this was James's great insight, was to recognize that actually thermodynamics is just an application of information theory, that the fundamental mechanism we're talking about is a statistical mechanical mechanism. It's fundamentally got to do with information exchange. And the blanket that we're talking about, the one that governs what the organism actually does at the level of physiology, it is an abstract formalism which absolutely differentiates between. The way that it works is that external states can influence the sensory states of the blanket, and the sensory states of the blanket can influence the internal states of the system. but the external states cannot directly influence the internal states. It has to go through the intermediary bound of the blanket. And likewise, internal states of the system cannot directly have consequences, causal effects upon the external states, except via the active states of the blanket. So again, the internal states have effects upon the blanket, and then the active states of the blanket have effects upon the external states. And so in that formal statistical mechanical sense, it is an absolute division in terms of causal dependencies. Now, this is not just a minor point. I mean, it clarifies the issue that you are asking. You're saying, but it seems more permeable than that. No, the governing principle in terms of the nervous system is processing information, and a good way, if you want to translate it into physiology and anatomy, we're talking about light waves impact upon the retina. The retina transduces them into nerve impulses. Light waves do not flow into the brain, and it's, the brain is an information processing device, and likewise, in terms of the active states of the system, our axons terminate. The nerve cell terminates on the muscle, the neuromuscular junction. After that, the muscle can act on the world, and it's a fundamental change. That's how we speak about it physiologically. But remember, the nerve impulse ultimately, it's just spike trains. I mean, all that the brain knows about the outside world is ones and zeros. It's just spike trains where it's a yes or a no, a yes or a no, and it's really quite marvelous if you think about it. That it must be the case that we are constructing an image of the world. This is our own inference about what is causing our sensory states, because we're not getting the sensory states directly. We're only getting the transduced spike trains, and to think that the whole of the brain is just processing ones and zeros, and out of this we construct this entire three-dimensional world of our everyday experience with all of its different qualities is really quite astonishing. We don't stop to think about these things enough. But it's not just the point I'm wanting to make, and here I'll just allude to it because, I don't want to take up too much time with just, you've only asked two questions, and I'm
yes, yeah, but it's
the fact that we're talking about a statistical mechanical formalism that explains how the cell works, how the body works, how the swarms that you spoke of work, and so on, is a terribly important thing, because when it comes to the mind-body problem, which is the nub of the matter, where we have to somehow explain how come, I am both this body that I'm seeing at the moment on the screen, and I'm this mind that I'm experiencing myself internally as being. These subjective states and these objective appearances, how do they relate to each other? What is my view is simply they're two observational perspectives upon the same thing. And then the question arises, well, what is that thing? And I'm saying that the thing that we are is actually a functional arrangement, a certain kind of a very specific type of mechanical arrangement. That, I'm speaking about it in functionalist terms. That ultimately we are. What is it? We are not ourselves, or we are something. We're not localized in our tissues. We're something to do with the what goes on between them, the function. So like, respiration isn't in the tissues of the lung. It's a function that explains how the lungs relate to the intercostal muscles, relate to the to the air pipes and so on. Digestion, likewise, it's a function which has to do with many different tissues distributed widely around the body. So we are the thing that is naturally selected and that evolves is a functional system that then takes these different phenotypic forms. In fact, the whole of natural selection is a self-organizing system.
Yes, we'll get there. I definitely ask some questions on that. Yeah. No, I agree with you on all this, yet I still have like remaining sort of question in my mind, like how the physical constitution of that system, like the actual molecules or whatever you want to name as a unit piece of material, and the information exchange are related, because information always goes through physical, it
Oh yes,
manifested in
information
a
is
physical.
physical. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but let's move on, because there are a lot of other things I want to talk to. So let's go back to the PEG, the periaqueductal gray, which is this little thing, or the bigger one that contains it, that is responsible for activating the cortex with feelings. And I would like to understand a little bit better, how should I imagine this? So what goes into it? Where does the information that goes there, and what it does exactly, and how does it relate to higher level cortical like thinking? So what are the relations between affect and thinking, and what goes inside? Because I guess it's not just by itself generates feelings, right? There are just some sensors that drive into it. So how should I imagine this?
Okay, so the periaqueductal gray, which is a quite poorly differentiated tissue around the this is where it gets its name,
Yeah.
around the central canal. So I want those who are not anatomically educated, I want them to picture the brain, is like a tube. The center of that tube is the ventricles. And so the core of the brain is the brain around the ventricles. And so this is in the brain stem, at the absolute innermost core of the brain stem, around the ventricle, the central canal. For 14 millimeters, there's these columns of tissue, which are called the periaqueductal gray. It's really like the innermost core of the brain. And the what the connectivity of the let's call it the PAG for short. The connectivity of it is very interesting. All of the homeostats, I mentioned earlier that we have a thermoregulatory and blood pressure regulatory and a hydration regulatory and sugar regulatory and blah, blah, blah. All of these different homeostats, they send their residual error signal to the PAG. What do I mean by residual error signal? I mean, after each action cycle where the creature, the organism has done what it predicts will bring it into homeostasis, will correct error signals, in other words, because homeostatic deviations are errors. This is where I need to be and expect to be. This is where I actually am. I've got to get that back to there. So how do I do it? As I said, you have to have predictions. So the organism enacts these predictions, trying to correct its homeostatic deviations, and the residual error of all of the homeostats descends upon the periaqueductal gray.
Okay.
So it's sort of like how do things stand now in terms of my needs? Very interestingly, right next to the PAG, there's a thing called a structure which in animals we call the tectum. In humans, we speak of the superior and inferior colliculi. And in the superior colliculi, right directly adjacent to the PAG, there's a sort of a condensed map. We call it a salience map of where do things stand in the outside world. It's not a conscious image. It's a sort of what is my current target? What is my current trajectory? It's a sort of a very basic rudimentary non-conscious attentional map. From all this senses, but also there's also action layers of this which act. So in the PAG, it's a what descends upon the PAG is where do things stand now in terms of my needs, and where do things stand now in terms of opportunities is right next to that.
Ah, I
And
see.
the fundamental function of the PAG is to then prioritize because we have multiple needs. The PAG prioritizes, and what does prioritization mean? It means which of these needs am I going to feel? The one that's prioritized is felt. And I'll explain to you why that is the case in a moment, why we feel it. But this is the crucial thing. So
And
all of these
there's always one that's felt, because that was another puzzling thing to me, that I can
yeah,
be hungry and cold at the same time.
yes, it doesn't have to be one,
Uh,
but it is most certainly very few. You can't do everything at once. You have that just the action bottleneck alone necessitates that you got to sort of say, okay, this is top of the list of what's going to be acted upon. And then let me mention there. So first of all, I just want to say again, the PAG is where the needs are registered and prioritized in relation to each other. In other words, which need is greater, where is the greater demand, the greater deviation, but also what are the current opportunities? Because you won't only if you've got 10 different things you need and one of them you can quickly meet, you're gonna if another one requires 2 days of work, that's not going to be your number one priority now. So, what it coming to consciousness, why that's so important, it speaks to the heart of the matter of what consciousness is for. It is the one that's prioritized, is the one that you're going to act on voluntarily. In other words, it's the one where you need to palpate how well or badly is this turning out? Is what I'm doing now turning out as expected, or is uncertainty prevailing? That's what the heart of feeling is. Feeling is good or bad. So this is the essence of affect. It's what's different between affect and perception. It has valence, goodness and badness. So bad just means moving further away from my preferred state. Good just means moving closer to my preferred state. So moving out of homeostasis is bad. Moving back into homeostasis is good. And so if it feels bad, it means I'm doing the wrong thing. So I must change my mind. So feeling tells the organism how well or badly it is doing in terms of its most basic need, which is to stay in homeostasis, and it enables choice. Feeling this is bad, I'll change my mind. Instead, I'll do this. That is a choice which underwrites all voluntary action. The non-prioritized needs are relegated to automaticity. In other words, they're not neglected. They are also attended to in the sense that the predictions of the predictive model that apply to those needs are run automatically. In other words, you're doing your best guess as to what's going to work, but you're not monitoring how well or badly it's going in terms of feeling, because feeling underwrites choice. And as I said, you can't feel everything at the same time. So, because you can't do everything at the same time. So the thing that you're feeling that's uppermost now, and I agree with you, it doesn't have to be one. It might be one or two, it might be three. It's balancing, like it's this and that. But the vast majority of your needs are being met autonomically or automatically
yeah,
all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
So that's what the PAG does. It prioritizes a need, which means it broadcasts
yeah.
this is the current feeling. The PAG is the generator of feelings, because generating a feeling is to prioritize a need. The need that's prioritized is felt. And I've
I see.
explained why it's felt.
I see, because in the
And
decision how we act, the
yes,
cortex has a big role, right? We can, suppress impulse.
So what's happening there in all of our actions, we're enacting predictions. If I do this, this is
Uh-huh.
what will follow. Except in the case of the prioritized one, it's if I do this, this will follow, and I feel whether it does or it doesn't.
I see.
And the so if I do this is then enacting a prediction, or really a policy. It's not just one action, it's a sequence of actions that I expect will have a certain outcome. So this is the reticular activating system uh, activates the forebrain. It's a very complicated business. I mean, it's not just a wash with chemicals. It's where the receptors are that respond to the different neuromodulators, and also it's not only reticular activating system. There are other more specific modulators which are the peptides. It's not just these single neurotransmitter systems coming from the reticular activating system. So there's a pattern of what I expect. That's what your long-term memory systems, the whole forebrain memory system is my predictive model. This is the plan, the policy, the prediction is do this. Then the palpating, which is what these arousal systems are doing. They are palpating your what we call confidence. And it's a nice word because it's got a psychological, it's a statistical word, but it's
Yes.
also how confident am I
Yeah.
that this current policy is turning out as expected. And it adjusts. So what the reticular activating neurons do is they adjust something called postsynaptic gain, which just is the same thing mechanically. It's increasing or decreasing the strength of a signal, which has to do with increasing or decreasing your confidence in the policy, as opposed to the error signals coming in. So these are my predictions. This is what I expect. How confident am I that this is what I should do in light of the incoming sensory signals, and the ones that get transmitted in are the error signals. So as there's increasing error, so I have decreasing confidence in my policy, and vice versa. As there's decreasing error, so I have increasing confidence in my policy. So this is what voluntary behavior is all about. It's palpating my certainty. It's felt uncertainty about how well or badly is this all going. The automatized actions, they have fixed precisions, fixed confidence levels. The conscious felt voluntary ones, you're palpating your confidence,
Yeah,
adjusting
okay.
your confidence on the basis and
Of how
remember
you feel.
all of this, when I speak of incoming signals, I mean, it's not just perceptual signals, it's ultimately tethered to feeling, in the sense of how well or badly it's going is felt homeostatic in relation to this deviation from the homeostatic settling point. So feeling, it's like, I feel like this, that's the affect. About that,
Yes.
about
The object.
the incoming perceptual sensory motor signal. And so this is the relationship between affect and cognition, or
Yes.
perception. It's I feel like this about that, and so the common currency is feeling and uncertainty, because that's what the phenomenal quality of feeling is how the system subjectively registers its uncertainty. So this is why I say that consciousness is felt uncertainty, but it's affective. At bottom, it's affective, but it's applied to perceptual and motor data. So it's, I feel like this about that. The sensory motor and cognitive context is just that. It contextualizes the feeling. It explains why you're feeling what you are and what you're feeling it about. So I hope that explains the basic.
So we will go in a direction of like concrete feelings, but I just a parenthesis to open, because it seems like the PAG is like this central hub where things go in and it activates. So I think we agree that it's not only higher level mammals that feel and are conscious, but everything that lives, right? So do you think that like we'll find something like the PAG in bacteria or monocellular organisms or other lower evolutionary lower level systems that don't have a brain? Do we need this sort of like central hub? Is it a prediction that we should look for that?
Well, the PAG we find in all vertebrates,
Yes.
but I think that you're right to draw attention to the. And when I say I think, I must tell you, I have a hard enough time of it
Uh-huh.
persuading many of my colleagues, even that lower mammals feel, you know, let alone all vertebrates feel, let alone now when you start speaking about invertebrates, so I agree, but I can assure you many people don't. But I agree it's not only vertebrates. In other words, it's not only creatures that have an anatomical PAG, but they must, if they have the functionality we're talking about, there must be some instantiation of this prioritization function, because I think that that's the heart of what consciousness is. Consciousness is the prioritized need, the need where you need to, when you need to palpate your uncertainty and have the capacity for choice, which underwrites voluntary action. So, yes, I do believe that invertebrates, I don't know if I would go so far as you did to say all living things are conscious. I know Mike Levin does say that.
He goes even
And
beyond that, I
yeah,
think.
and I I developed my views on consciousness before I met Mike. And as I keep saying to you, I've had a hard enough time of it with my colleagues, persuading them, of what I believed until I met Mike. And I said to Mike, but, the essential thing, it's not homeostasis. It is being able to maintain homeostasis in an unpredicted environment, something not predicted by natural selection.
And you
Not
also need more than one variable that you want to maintain, because if it's only one,
very,
it can
very
be a
important.
thermostat. But if you have to
Yeah.
adapt to which one to prioritize, this is
Yeah.
where you need
No,
like a
that's terribly
central, yeah,
important. I'm
yeah,
glad
yeah.
you said that because um, when I spoke of valence earlier, it makes it seem as if consciousness is or affect is just a continuous variable, but it's not. We have to meet each one of these needs in their own right. You have to eat and sleep and drink and urinate and so it's not just a matter of total need. It's you can't say 8 out of 10. I'm 8 out of 10 thirsty, plus I'm 8 out of 10 sleepy. So I'm 16 out of 20 total needs. So I'll just sleep. That reduces the total number, but you'll die because you have to also drink and do all the other
Mhm,
things. And
mhm, mhm.
so what I'm getting at is that each one of these homeostats must be treated as a categorical variable, must be treated as a category. And that, I believe, is the ground zero of where qualia come from, because the
Mhm.
difference between categorical and continuous variables is that categorical variables just are distinguished qualitatively. 8 out of 10 of thirst is not the same thing as 8 out of 10 of sleepiness. They are qualitatively, that is to say, categorically different things. So, yeah, what you just said there is very important. But I just want to finish the comment about Mike Levin
Mhm.
that so I said to Mike Levin, I will I'm unlike most of my colleagues, I'm willing to attribute consciousness to any creature, any organism that shows this functionality.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly. That's
yeah,
my engineering instinct too. Like functionality will, I
yeah.
mean, it is functionality, it is the phenomenon.
Yes. Well, that I don't know how else we can do it
Yeah.
because, of course, you're on more secure ground when you're dealing with anatomically homologous organisms. When you say, okay, I know what the PAG does in me. Let me see if I predict that if I stimulate it there in this organism, it will show that behavior, because, and this is accompanied by that feeling in me. So presumably it's accompanied by the same feeling in that organism. When you don't have anatomical homologs, it's very hard to make predictions about what you expect will, and if you can't predict certain behaviors which are associated with certain feelings in us, it becomes more uncertain. But I don't think that therefore we should have radical skepticism and just say because they're not the same as us, we have to be skeptical about them having feeling. I'm very happy to go then onto functional ground as Mike does and implores us to, and I'm
So
ready to do so.
So it gets even more interesting if we start to consider organisms that we are part of, like a family, a country, or a species, and extend this notion there and what feelings are there and who feels and how do those happen. So this is a little bit the direction I want to go, but through feelings. So when I went through, by the way, I will put the video link where you go through the Hidden Spring in a 9-lecture series. It's beautiful, and it's there. So people who are listening to this, you can go there and get more details on this. But there is one episode where you go through a lot of feelings, like fear. Let's say that's a danger, and often you don't even have an object of this. It's just a feeling that there's something is wrong. For example, I'm uncertain about the future, and it usually almost feels like equivalent to that uncertainty. Sometimes it has an object, like I'm afraid of that lion, and then there's a reaction. You have anger where you want a goal and there is some obstacle between you and your goal, and then you get angry. So that has more points to an object of this. So it's not only the feeling itself, but I'm angry at that thing. And if I go to pain, which I'm not really even sure if it's part of this system, but if, like, let's say I think it is, so it's about tissue damage, and tissue damage has to be concrete, like where do the pain comes from. So it has also this map of my body, so where the pain comes from. And pain is already something where, so if I think about fear and anger, I understand that this is absolutely my feelings as an organism. But if I think about pain, it's like it's my tissue that has the feeling first that it's cut or it hurt. And that tissue just cannot handle the problem. It doesn't have any action to manage the problem. So it sends a signal upward in the hierarchy of organisms, which I am, right? So I have cells, I have tissues, I have organs, and I have me. And when I'm cut, those local cellular systems start screaming, and even almost like, it's sort of like a prayer, because they don't know what to do, but they just send the prayer up to me. So maybe I can move away or I can do something with that, and they will be happy too. So it's like a signaling mechanisms between layers of the organisms, right? And so I think it's not even controversial, I'm saying, right? Like that pain is a signaling mechanisms from lower level to upper level, right?
Sorry, I'm agreeing. Yes.
Yeah, you agree. So then I go to the other one, which I found even more interesting, is that we have feelings like parental attachment. We love kids, our kids. We attach to them. That they cost a lot in terms of all kind of consumption and energy and everything that we like to have. We have lust to copulate and to reproduce, which is even more costly. And if I look at from my point of view, sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense to do that as an individual. If my only goal is to survive, or whatever, like my lifetime, something I to achieve, then making kids is not, it's very costly. And so but of course, from from a higher level point of view, from the species point of view, if we don't reproduce, the species will die. And I'm putting into quotes, but it's not necessarily even in quotes. So it feels like that those kind of feelings like lust, parental attachment, and the most interesting for me is seeking. So I will go to the seeking separately, but let's say lust and parental attachment. It feels like it's not my feeling. It's the feeling of the species of being in danger of dying if I don't reproduce. So it's almost like a signal of top down into me. And then I interiorize that feeling as lust. I feel it as lust, but it really comes from up. So would you agree with that too?
I agree with that. I'm not sure where you're going with all of this, but let me just say something. I mean, so everything you said, I agree with. But you'll tell me later where you want to go with that. You're saying you want to speak about seeking, but so far what you're talking about is that there are feelings which are, as it were, generated from a lower scale within the organism, like tissue damage, sending a prayer, as you put it, up to the brain. And then there, what, as you're putting it, there are things which really are not in my individual interest, but rather in the interest of the group or the species. And these seem to be, sending orders down to me rather than prayers up to me. This is the big picture of what you're saying. And you're saying, so some of these feelings are not really ours. And this is where I want to comment. The feeling is ours.
Yes, no, I agree. No,
Yeah.
yeah.
But it's very important psychologically, this, because it's what governs our the subject of the mind. And let's not forget the mind is first and foremost a subject. So what governs the subjective mental life first and foremost is feelings. We can work out scientifically, oh, I can see why natural selection made pain, tissue damage, why it made it feel bad to me, because it's my tissue ultimately. And I can see why natural selection made copulation or nurturance feel good to me, because ultimately I'm a member of this species. And at the level of the individual reproductive unit, I must reproduce and I must nurture my offspring. But really, what motivates us is the feeling itself. So it's not like when you have sex, it's not in order to do your biological duty and reproduce. It's actually because it
Exactly.
feels good.
It's beautiful. Yeah,
And
right.
yeah, and the telling point there is that much of the time, if not most of the time, when we have sex, uh, if a heterosexual sex in young people, they are trying not to reproduce. What they're doing is like antithetical to what the whole mechanism is there for. But what motivates them is the feeling. Likewise, in homosexual sex, it can't possibly result in reproduction, yet people do it because they like it, it feels good to them. And a great deal of human behavior, and not only human behavior, but, since you and I are humans, let's talk about our species. A great deal of what we do, cannot be understood unless we recognize that actually what motivates us is feelings. And a lot of the weird things we do, like addictions, where, people do very self-harming things because it feels good. So I just wanted to make that point, that although there are prayers coming from below and there are orders coming from above, at the level of human behavior or the behavior of each organism, uh, those of us organisms, and it seems as if this is a great majority of us organisms that have the capacity to feel, that's all that's regulating them. It's not the underlying biological story. The feelings have, they evolve for certain reasons, but they have causal powers of their own.
Yes.
Once feelings come into existence, they They have causal powers of their own.
No, I completely agree with you. So that's what I find interesting. So it's like for me, it's a beautiful system that emerges from this. So my feelings are mine, but their origin is not me. That's what I'm
Yes.
saying. So they mean something for something that I may cannot even comprehend. That's where it comes from. But
Yeah.
the reason I'm doing it because it feels good. But the reason why that feeling exists is because of some bigger thing
Yeah.
that wants to
Yes.
want to self-preserve or exist, right?
I agree with that completely.
So this because the reason why I'm so enthusiastic about it because it sort of connects science with spirituality. Like we do a lot of things which seems completely like meaningless if you look at it with your left hemisphere and try to analyze it, yet it feels good, right? And so where I wanted to go, so seeking. So let's talk about seeking because
Yeah.
seeking is this weird thing for me where it might be explained on my level, but it's probably good for the species, especially cultured species like we are, where if I find something, it's not only good for me, but I can write it down and maybe it will be good for humanity, right? So the anecdote I usually tell here that normally I'm an AI scientist. I come from machine learning, but I had a almost 10-year period where I worked with physicists, and part of it was on the Higgs boson. And it felt good to be there. Eh, I was also in another collaboration called Pierre collaboration where we worked on cosmic rays, high energy cosmic rays, these beautiful, mysterious events. The size of the group was about 150, which is like the Dunbar number. And to be in this collaboration felt so at home in a sense, because it's like the typical group we like to be in. Yet, the actual thing we studied had, I mean, I cannot imagine an explanation why, like knowing the mass of the Higgs boson will help me to survive, right? So it seemed like we were working on something that we couldn't explain why. The reason why we worked on it because it felt good to be in this collaboration and working on something together and feel this togetherness, etc. But the actual object of the study was something completely mysterious, like the mass of the Higgs boson or the energy of these cosmic rays. And definitely there is a seeking feeling in this. So besides being good in this tribe, it also felt good because of the novelty, the discovery, everything that we strive for as scientists. But the actual object of this was like mysterious. Why high energy cosmic rays? And this is where I started to think about this seeking behavior and everything that I interiorized, like being well in the tribe, almost coming from up, like some other organism I'm part of, like humanity or whatever, needs that information. It needs to know the mass of the Higgs boson. It needs to know where these cosmic rays are coming from, because maybe this is relevant for that organism for some kind of survival or some kind of self-preservation reasons. And this I don't know where I'm going with this, but this seems to be not like the standard description of how the world works. That's why I was
Yeah.
so surprised discovering this psychology of this with this sort of like spiritual part of why working on something.
Wonderful. So let me respond to that. First of all, by taking us back a little bit in the conversation. So I'm not immediately responding directly and fully to what you've just said, but I need to go back a little bit and say, you said fleetingly, if pain is part of the system. So I just want to make clear uh, all of these homeostats. We speak about 7 emotional ones, and you've been emphasizing those. But is the emotional ones work the same as the bodily ones? So pain, hunger, thirst, sleepiness, they're homeostatic. So is fear, rage, lust. also homeostatic. And so the same thing, it's not is pain part of the system? They're all part of the same thing, except there are some homeostats, very interestingly, that we're not conscious of at all, like blood pressure regulation. Why? My answer is because the response is so stereotyped. There's only two things you can do when your blood pressure goes up. You can change your heart rate and you can change your vasodilation. And when your blood pressure goes down, same thing.
Can
So
I
there's
stop you there just a little bit? Because what if it's not, I'm not conscious about it for sure, but maybe a lower level system inside me is,
Well,
because
that's why
I
I
don't
wanted
have
to
any
go back.
action, right?
Yeah, that's why
Okay.
I wanted to
Yeah.
go back to
Yeah.
that because it speaks to your bigger question.
Yeah.
So, at what level of the system do these feelings register? Well, the level that I am at, I'm feeling these feelings. There's a lower level which I don't feel, but that doesn't mean and you're saying, and there's a higher level that I don't feel. So these are the mysteries or the spiritual dimension that you're leading us toward. So I want to say as a second step. So the first thing was I wanted to say something about this hierarchy of homeostats, not all of which I feel. Even the lower level ones I don't feel. I don't feel the needs of the human species. I feel my needs.
Yes.
And this is one of the things that Mike taught me, Mike Levin, that just because you don't exist at that level as a system, you're
Yes.
in this blanket, doesn't mean that there aren't feelings at that level and this level. And I grant him that. You have to grant him that if you're willing to follow the logic. Now, I want to say something about seeking. That's the next thing I wanted to say. Seeking is it's not a uniquely human thing. It's a very, very widespread emotion uh, and behavioral tendency, which is basically just foraging. Animals explore. Um, if you don't explore and engage with the world, then nothing else is going to happen. So first and foremost, you explore, you engage with the world, and while you do that, you bump into all the things you need and all the things you must avoid, and then you sort of learn about how the world works. So the standard story about seeking is that it is a proactive engagement with uncertainty. So proactive in the sense that um, something like fear or rage, it's like here and now, I've got to get rid of the uncertainty of how do I escape this danger or how do I get rid of this bastard that's in my way, but seeking is engaging with future uncertainties. It's
Yeah,
it's
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 almost like the other way around. Like we are looking for uncertainty to.
You're looking for
Yeah.
uncertainty, and that's where the paradox arises. It's like in all of the other ones, you're trying to get rid of uncertainty. With seeking, you positively drawn to uncertainty. That's what we mean by it's interesting. It's interesting because I don't understand it. I don't know it. It's new. It's a positive engagement with uncertainty. But the answer to the apparent paradox is that by engaging with uncertainty now, you're reducing uncertainty in the future.
Uh-huh.
So seeking is a luxury, because I don't have to deal with present uncertainties. I can deal with future uncertainties. Just so the more you know about the world in which you have to meet your needs, the more you're going to be able to meet your needs in that world, and the less that world is going to bite you in the backside. It's because you know how it works, you understand. So seeking does have a rather prosaic biological explanation. That's why we're interested in what's unknown. That's why but you're speaking about more than that. And so now I want to go to that level. As a step toward it, I want to mention what you spoke of there is not only seeking, it also includes what we call play. Play has to do with group, being a member of the group. It has to do with many things, but being a member of a group we are social species, and so we have drives, homeostatic needs, which have to do with what is how do you make viable groups? And so we what is good for the group is good for each individual in the group, but it's fundamentally good for the group. And because we're a social species, we play our part in it all. And this. So both in terms of play and in terms of seeking, I very much take the main point that you're making, which is that there are things, as it were, demands or orders or instructions coming from a level of organization above ourselves. And I don't think that's what explains the sense of wonder. I've told you what I think, and I don't think, I think that what we sense is our own level of those things. But what you are speaking of, which is far more interesting than what we sense, is what we don't sense, which maybe is sensate at some other level. And and you're saying that starts to speak to what higher powers and the divine and and the spiritual and all of that. I'm ready to agree with that. I'm not an unspiritual person. I am not an atheist. You might be surprised to learn. Uh, I'm agnostic. I think, and it's very much in the spirit of what you're saying. I'm very happy to acknowledge the limits of my, not only my knowledge, but my capacity for knowledge. There are things that I cannot know. And I actually take comfort in that, the fact that there are things I cannot know, because some of the things that I think I do know, I don't like. I hope I'm wrong,
Yes.
like about the facts of mortality and so on. If your organization disintegrates, as it will, then you disintegrate. That's a pity. But if you're disintegrating into a something, some larger organization of which you are also part, that I take comfort in. The possibility of that. But I can't know those things because they transcend the bounds of of my level of organization. I'm very happy to acknowledge and not only acknowledge, but I welcome it.
Okay, so thank you. It's good to hear that you, I mean, you sort of agree with this, because where I want to go with this is the following. I think that there are a lot of psychological, physical illnesses and also sociological illnesses which are about these feelings that originate from somewhere and telling something about that being, not ending up at the right position. Like, we suppress our feelings, which is not that they don't exist, it's just they sort of don't arrive to our consciousness because of some past events, or immune systems get in trouble because they are overwhelmed and they're not functioning well, they don't feel the danger in a certain sense, or societies. My favorite example is the D-Day thing, what went on in the German army, the day that they knew that the Americans were coming, or the Allied forces were coming, and it wasn't night, and they phoned Berlin, but the general in Berlin decided not to wake up Hitler, and so the Tigers of Roma could not be sent to the beach because they needed that signal from the top of it, the top consciousness of the German whatever, to send that order. And this is how sort of like the German army started to disintegrate. So this kind of communication failures are sort of illnesses in the system. And so I can imagine even like sort of like a meta state where we normatively want to be, where every feeling that originates will arrive to the right actor that can do something about it. And so it's sort of like an alignment across all these levels, which would make the organization healthy. So we can normatively go to that health somehow. And when there is an illness, we can identify where it comes from and which feeling was not felt, you know. And I
Yeah.
don't know if I'm just going with this. I don't know where, but this feels to me like an interesting way to look at
Yes,
problems.
yes. I think that we can, I mean, just to be concrete for a moment, there's in fact, he's also a physicist. He's a compatriot of mine. His name's George Ellis.
Mhm.
He's a cosmologist. He worked when he was young. Um, he worked with Stephen Hawking in Cambridge on black holes. Very, very brilliant man, George Ellis. And he's written about top-down and bottom-up causation and non-reductive physics about how you can't at the level of quantum mechanics explain the behavior of societies and that there are levels of organization at the say the level of the society, which then constrain what can happen at the quantum level in each individual member of that society. It can't override the bottom up rules, but it constrains how they're going to be deployed, the bottom up rules. So there's bidirectional causality
Mhm.
up and down the hierarchy. Uh, so uh, George Ellis writes about all of this in the way that a physicist would write about it all, right down to a very sort of concrete level. But I think that that's what you're talking about, and I'm completely in accord with that. The behavior of the individual at their own level of organization is constrained by organizational dynamics that are at a larger scale than the individual. Um, and the possibility that there is a homeostatic mechanism to all of that, I think, is entirely plausible. It's self-organization all the way down and all the way up.
Mhm.
Um, so, as I said a moment earlier in our conversation, I think the whole of natural selection is a single
Mhm.
self-organizing system. You could say the whole of life is one self-organizing system, which then has all of these component parts. I'm
Okay.
easily able
Okay.
to agree with that.
Could we call this sort of like a meta homeostasis that the levels
Mm,
have to be aligned in this sense?
yeah.
Otherwise, somebody will die. Maybe not me, but some cells of mine, or
Mm,
maybe the society, or something like that, right? If
yeah.
there are, if this alignment is,
And that's what you mean
yeah,
by
yeah,
pathologies of the group or
yeah,
pathologies
yeah.
of the species or whatever. It's or pathologies of the army. It's if it moves into a non-viable state, it's going to
Mhm.
disintegrate. Yeah.
Okay, last maybe one or two questions is about. I know that you have a project on engineering consciousness,
Mm.
and I heard about it like 1 2 years ago, and I'm just wondering, I'm super curious where you are on this and whether your stance that these, if we understand the function, we can engineer it, whether it's still the same as what I heard like 2 years ago, or do you have empirical evidence that it works, or where is this project?
Yeah, so yes, I've been at it now for about 5 years, and the group that I'm working with is grown over that time. Um, we've also fortunately recently acquired good funding. So there were fewer of us and we had less in the way of financial resources. Now there are more of us with representing a greater variety of skills, and we have much more money at our disposal. So we're making more rapid progress as time passes. I would say where we're up to, we're still working on virtual agents. We haven't yet moved to the level of embodying our agents robotically. We've got two roboticists on our team. We certainly plan to do that. But where we're at now, we're still working on a virtual, well, I say a virtual agent. We've been through gazillions of them, many generations of them. And that's why we're still working with virtual agents, because we're working out formal problems
Yes.
in terms of the functional architecture and computational dynamics and all of this sort of stuff. We're also working on how do we best measure what's going on in our agent. We want to instrumentize it, for want of a better, well, not want to, we are instrumentizing, uh, creating a visualizable metrics of different aspects of what's going on, so that we can monitor the internal dynamics of the agent uh, at the same time as we're observing its behavior.
I see.
And we also, down the line, are wanting to be able to intervene in these dynamics and see, does that have the expected predicted consequences for the behavior and so on. So that's more or less the level that we're at. And we're right now, in fact, between now and October, I and the physicist who's my co-principal investigator, his name's Jonathan Schock, we're busy now drawing up a short list of functional and behavioral criteria, which we want to propose to our colleagues uh, as these. We need to have a list that we can at least a reasonable majority, or a reasonable number of sufficiently influential people in the field have to agree. You can, otherwise you can always just keep kicking the can down the road. You'll never know for sure that your agent is governed by feelings, because I don't even know for sure that you are. So
Yes.
and you see how much trouble I have with my colleagues in terms of these hydranencephalic kids and so on. Imagine how much trouble I'm going to have with an artificial agent. So I think we need to agree in advance that these are reasonable criteria, that if a sufficient number of these criteria are met, then the weight of the evidence is enough for us to say, well, this is plausibly a conscious agent, an agent that is the voluntary behavior of which is governed by feelings. That, alongside the plausible mechanistic, I mean, I could take you through a whole story about why I think that an agent with these properties, why mechanistically it makes sense that such a thing, would feel. But so that's where we are now. The most interesting thing that we're about to do is to try to get a reasonable number of our colleagues, suitably chosen colleagues, to agree on what criteria we will use to determine uh, whether or not it's reasonable to infer that our agent is feeling. Do I think that our agent is yet at that stage? I don't think so. But I'll
But
tell you what I think. I think within the next 3 to 5 years, we if our agent has not met the criteria that I was just talking to you about, that we're trying to get a reasonable amount of consensus about, then not only would I be very surprised, I would probably give up trying. I would probably think, well, not
wonderful.
that it cannot be done, but that the route that I'm taking is not the one
Okay,
that's.
okay, okay. But you're still convinced that it's doable.
Oh yes, oh
Yeah, all
yes,
right.
I am
Okay, okay,
more
okay.
than ever. Yeah.
And in this effort, do you think this sort of hierarchical organization plays a role, or you just or engineering like a
No,
flat
I mean,
agent?
no, I'm
No?
very
No?
interested in that, what you've said today, but that's not, we haven't even got to the level of multi-agents. We're not working at the multi-agent
I
level.
see, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. The reason I'm asking is because do you think autopoiesis is necessary for being conscious or not? Or we can just engineer a system top down and
Yeah, it's funny you should ask about that, because I this afternoon wrote a commentary on an article by Anil Seth. Anil Seth has had a paper accepted by BBS, Behavioral and Brain Sciences, in which he argues uh, for what he calls a biological naturalism, and argues against the possibility of artificial consciousness on those grounds. And one of the grounds he uses is autopoiesis, and he says that this is uniquely biological thing. And I referred in my commentary to evidence of how easy it is to create an autopoietic system in an entirely virtual form. I keep on mentioning, as it's happened, this paper of Friston's, which is so brilliant, from 2013. There he demonstrates how autopoiesis arises naturally from self-organizing, from a certain level of dynamical complexity of self-organizing system. And so I think that autopoiesis is a natural component of the fundamental dynamics that we're talking about of living systems, let alone conscious systems. But there are many things that evolved in a certain form or on a certain substrate, which you can take the principles, the crucial principles, and you can instantiate them in silico without it necessarily having the whole context. So I'm not sure that autopoiesis is a necessary component of a self-organizing system that feels.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it is, but I can see why. I can see deeply why autopoiesis is such a fundamental component of all biological self-organizing systems. I just don't think that the autopoietic part is necessarily the fundamental. What is fundamental, I think, to consciousness is not even that it is self-preservative. In other words, it evolved because it has such advantages in terms of the adaptive fitness of organisms in environments which were not predicted. But I think again you can isolate the mechanism and instantiate and embody it in a system that isn't necessarily trying to survive. I think that is possible.
I see. So somebody will maintain its existence out from
If it
outside.
has the same functionality and it's embodied in some new form, I think it's the
Okay.
essential thing. I mean, I'm really deeply functionalist. I
Uh-huh.
really think that as I was saying earlier in our conversation, that what I fundamentally am is a functional system.
Yes. 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 Dynamical. Yeah. Yeah, and I think the reason why I asked it, I found it is important because I think if autopoiesis is a necessary thing, then we have to go all the way down with autopoiesis, and we actually get to, it has to be some kind of physical biological system that builds itself. So,
Yeah.
so if on the other hand, if it can be just the principle can be instantiated in a system, then it seems easier, right?
But I just want to say again that it's not only biological systems that build themselves
Yeah.
autopoietically, that there's this virtual system that Friston engineered in that 2013 paper. You see the pictures, he shows you
Yeah,
how.
no, I know, but the on the substrate they are instantiated. It's a computer or something that has a physical existence, and if it doesn't exist, then the virtual system doesn't exist either. So in
Well,
this sense, like we are like self-building,
yes,
self-containing
yes,
from molecular level up, or whatever
yeah,
is the lowest level, right? It seems more
I
robust,
agree.
but yeah, okay,
I
okay,
understand.
wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark. It's almost
It's
like
been a
90
great
minutes.
pleasure talking
Yeah.
to you too. You've got a very good and interesting mind. So
Thank
thank
you,
you.
thank you, thank you. I'm trying, yeah, and thank you very much for this, and it was great.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.